It's amazing how something we often take for granted, like the right to vote, has such a long and really kind of turbulent history.
It really does, and it's a history that every citizen should be familiar with.
Exactly. I mean, just imagine a time when only a select few had the power to choose their leaders.
It's hard to believe, but that was the reality in the early days of the United States.
When the Constitution was first ratified in 1789, the right to vote was incredibly limited.
It was. Only white male landowners over the age of 21 could vote.
Think about that for a second.
A huge portion of the population, including women, minorities, those without property, they had absolutely no say in
Yeah.
shaping their government.
It's mind-boggling when you really think about it. But what's interesting is that even within those early limitations, there were these kind of glimmers of change.
Oh, absolutely. And a great example of that is New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Yeah, for a brief period, New Jersey actually allowed women who owned property to vote.
Wait, really? I
Right.
had no idea.
It's true, and it's a fact that often gets overlooked. From 1776 to 1807, New Jersey's constitution granted suffrage to all inhabitants who met certain property qualifications.
So they didn't explicitly say men only.
No, and this wording unintentionally opened the door for some women, particularly single women and widows who owned property.
Wow, so for a few decades, women in New Jersey had a taste of voting rights. What happened? Why'd they take that away?
It was a combination of things. As partisan politics heated up, there was more scrutiny of voting practices.
Makes sense.
There were concerns about women's role in society, whether they should even have a voice in government, and frankly, there was a lot of resistance from those who simply didn't believe women should have political power.
Ah, so the old guard pushing back.
Exactly. And that all culminated in the state legislature passing a law in 1807 that explicitly limited suffrage to white male taxpayers.
So women were effectively disenfranchised once again.
Sadly, yes.
It's a stark reminder that progress isn't always linear, is it?
Right. There can be these steps forward and then steps backward.
And speaking of institutions that have been at the center of debate for centuries, let's talk about the Electoral College.
Ah, yes, the Electoral College. Always a hot topic, especially in recent elections.
For those who might not be totally familiar with it, can you give us a quick rundown of how it came to be?
Sure. The Electoral College was established in Article 2 of the Constitution, and it was really a compromise
A compromise between.
between those who wanted a direct popular vote for president and those who wanted Congress to have that power.
So they had to find some middle ground.
They did, and
Yeah.
the Electoral College was the result.
It's fascinating how they navigated those different viewpoints back then.
Hmm.
But I think it's crucial to acknowledge that the Electoral College wasn't just about balancing power between the branches of government. It was also deeply intertwined with the issue of slavery.
You're absolutely right, and that's a point that often gets lost in the modern debates.
Exactly. You can't really understand the Electoral College without understanding its historical context.
You can't. Southern states where slavery was prevalent were really worried that a direct popular vote would diminish their influence.
Because they had a smaller voting population.
Precisely. Remember, enslaved people were counted as 3/5 of a person for representation in Congress, despite not having the right to vote.
Ah, the infamous three-fifths compromise.
Yes, and that compromise had a direct impact on the Electoral College.
So by allocating electoral votes based on a state's total number of representatives and senators, which was influenced by the three-fifths compromise, Southern states gained more power in presidential elections.
Exactly. Their influence was amplified despite having a smaller eligible voting population.
It's amazing how something established so long ago still has such a profound impact on our political system today.
It's a testament to the enduring legacy of those early decisions and compromises.
And those compromises, as we've seen, weren't always rooted in principles of equality and fairness.
True, but it's important to understand those origins if we're going to have a meaningful conversation about the Electoral College today.
Absolutely. But let's shift gears now and talk about the expansion of voting rights. I think we need to dive into the landmark amendments that really reshaped American democracy.
You're talking about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Those are the ones passed during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. They were absolutely monumental.
They were. They granted basic rights to formerly enslaved people and significantly expanded the electorate.
It was a huge step forward, but it wasn't without its challenges.
Definitely not. The fight for full and equal suffrage was far from over. The fight for full and equal suffrage was far from over, especially as we move into the civil rights era.
Yeah, that period is just full of really intense, sometimes inspiring and sometimes heartbreaking stories.
It is. We see some of the most blatant and just brutal attempts to suppress the black vote, even with the 15th Amendment in place.
It's almost impossible to believe that this was happening, less than a century ago. Like, what are some examples of those dangers?
Well, the murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner back in '64 are a pretty stark example.
Yeah, that one always sticks with me.
These three young guys were down in Mississippi working to register black voters and help them, actually exercise their rights.
It's just awful, like, to think that these young men, just driven by this belief in equality, were murdered just for trying to help people vote.
It really is. And their deaths just shocked the nation and really exposed that brutal reality of racial terrorism in the South.
And it also just highlighted how badly we needed federal intervention, like how we needed the federal government to step in and protect these voting rights.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't talk about voting rights in the civil rights era without talking about Selma.
The Selma to Montgomery March, right?
In '65. It's such an iconic moment in the fight for voting rights.
Selma became a real flashpoint. The
Right.
march was supposed to be this peaceful demonstration, but it was met with just unbelievable violence.
Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, and those images of peaceful protesters getting beaten, tear gassed, it
Yeah.
was all over the news.
It was. And it was really a turning point,
It galvanized so much support for the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
which was a landmark piece of legislation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was aimed at dismantling all those systemic barriers that were keeping Black Americans from voting.
So, like, they outlawed literacy tests.
Right.
And all those other discriminatory practices.
Exactly. And they gave the federal government oversight of voter registration and elections in places where disenfranchisement was a problem.
So the feds could actually step in and ensure that black citizens were able to vote.
That was the idea.
Did it work?
Well, within a year, Black voter registration in the South just soared.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you could say it was pretty effective.
That's incredible. It just shows you the power of, legislation when it's used to actually promote social change.
It does. But unfortunately, the fight didn't end in '65.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Voting Rights Act was a big win, but it's not like everything was fixed.
Right. The struggle for equal voting rights continues even today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just look at all the news about it.
Yeah.
But it's not as obvious as it was back then.
True. It's become more subtle, more insidious.
Like what are some of the things going on now?
Well, voter suppression tactics are a big one.
Voter suppression. What does that look like these days?
It's all about making it harder for certain groups to vote, especially minorities and low-income folks.
Like by making it harder to register or to actually cast a ballot.
Exactly.
So it's not like they're saying you can't vote. It's more like, we're going to make it really inconvenient for you.
You got it.
Okay, but what are some examples of how they do that?
Well, one way is restricting access to polling places.
How do they do that?
They might reduce the number of polling locations.
Oh, so like fewer places to vote, especially in neighborhoods that are predominantly minority neighborhoods.
Right. Or they make it harder to vote early or absentee.
Yeah, I've heard about that, like making it hard to get an absentee ballot or limiting the days for early voting.
Things like that.
And I've also heard about purging voter rolls.
That's a big one.
Is that when they remove eligible voters from the rolls?
It is. And often it happens because of some clerical error or because someone's information is outdated.
So you might show up to vote and you're not even on the list anymore.
Exactly. And then there are voter ID laws.
Ah, yes, the voter ID debate.
That one's been going on for a while.
Yeah, it's a hot button issue.
Yeah.
Some folks argue that it's necessary to prevent voter fraud,
Right.
but others say that it disproportionately disenfranchises minority voters,
Mm-hmm.
folks who might not have easy access to those required forms of ID.
And that's a very real concern, especially when you consider that studies have shown time and again that voter fraud is incredibly rare.
Oh, yeah, I've read about that.
The Brennan Center, which does a lot of research on voting rights, has found that voter fraud is basically non-existent.
So it's not really a widespread problem that needs to be addressed with these restrictive measures?
Not at all. But it's a narrative that's often used to justify these policies that, end up having a much bigger impact on certain communities.
It's like they're solving a problem that doesn't even exist.
Yeah, exactly.
And unfortunately, it's not just about these subtle tactics. There's still outright voter intimidation happening in some places.
That's right. It can take many forms.
Like what kinds of things?
Aggressive questioning at the polls, spreading misinformation about voting requirements, even threats of violence.
Wow, that's scary. So what can someone do if they experience something like that? Or if they witness it happening to someone else?
They should definitely report it.
To who?
To poll workers, election officials, anybody in charge. They can also call the Election Protection Hotline.
Is that the 1-866 are your vote number?
That's the one.
Good to know. It's a reminder that voting is a right that needs to be protected.
It is, and we need to be vigilant.
So we've talked about all these challenges. What can our listeners do? How can they actually make a difference when it comes to voting rights?
Well, I think the first thing is to just be informed.
Yeah, knowledge is power,
Yeah.
right? Especially when it comes to something as important as voting.
Exactly. You got to understand the issues, do your research on the candidates, know your rights as a voter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And luckily, there are some great resources out there to help people stay informed.
Oh, yeah. Tons of resources. Like vote.org is a good one.
.org, right?
Yeah, they have info on registering, checking your registration status, finding your polling place, even seeing what's on your ballot.
Super helpful. And what about the League of Women Voters?
Oh, they're fantastic.
They've been fighting for voting rights forever.
Over a century. And they provide really good, nonpartisan info about elections and candidates.
Yeah, so important to have those unbiased sources. But it's not just about being informed yourself, is it? It's about being an ally, too.
You got it. It's about supporting those organizations that are actually working to protect voting rights, the ones fighting voter suppression.
Like, what groups are you thinking of?
Well, there's the ACLU. They do a lot of great work. The NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And the Brennan Center, of course.
Yeah, the Brennan Center, we mentioned them before.
They're all actively involved in these legal battles, pushing for reforms, making sure that everyone has equal access to the ballot box.
It's inspiring to see so many people dedicated to this fight. And it's not just those big national organizations, right?
No, definitely not.
There's so much happening at the grassroots level, too.
Yeah, and that's where individuals can really make a difference.
Like how so?
Volunteering.
Oh, yeah.
Get involved with a local organization that's registering voters, getting people to the polls, or even just monitoring elections to make sure everything's running smoothly.
That's a great point. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by these big issues, like voting rights.
It can be.
But even small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely. Just talking to your friends and family about the importance of voting can go a long way. Or sharing information about voting rights on social media.
It's about creating that culture
Yeah.
where everyone understands how crucial voting is and, how we need to be vigilant in protecting that right.
Exactly. Because it is the foundation of our democracy. It's how we make our voices heard.
Well said. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? We talked about those early limitations on suffrage, the struggles for equal rights, those hard-won victories, and the challenges that are still out there.
It's been a winding road for sure.
It has. And it's far from over, this fight for equal access to the ballot box. But I think it's important to remember that progress is possible. Throughout history, we've seen how everyday people coming together demanding change can actually make a difference.
It's true. Those landmark achievements, they didn't happen by chance. They happened because people fought for them. They organized, they protested, they voted, they demanded better.
And that's what we need to keep doing. So as we wrap things up here, I want to leave our listeners with a call to action. Stay informed, stay engaged, stay involved, and never, ever take your right to vote for granted. It's one of the most precious rights we have as citizens, and it's up to all of us to protect it.
Well said. The future of our democracy really does depend on it.